You've been reading a bunch in the Unseen Realm.
Oh, did you get that?
Yeah, we got a copy of it.
It's pretty wild.
I did.
I mean, I got both the audio book and the regular book. Just the regular book started to make me fall asleep at night.
The regular book, what?
It started to make me fall asleep at night. And you have to read that when you're fully awake.
Unseen Realm?
Yeah.
Yeah. We've been reading it tonight. I read it out loud first.
That's good. He's a cool dude. It's too cold. It's way too cold.
And the sun doesn't come out, and it makes it feel like,
Well,
They say Tuesday, it's like, I mean, we've gone, what, a whole week without seeing the sun, really?
Well, I mean, from a winter standpoint, all things considered, this has been
Not bad.
a pretty mild winter.
Pretty wet.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's been interesting is, you know, we get those big drops in temperatures, and up until this week, it brings that windstorm that gets rid of all the cedar and all that stuff, which that's good. Because cedar hasn't felt that bad.
I haven't had to water my yard.
You haven't had to water any.
No.
You know, because I haven't had to put water in my pool. Because usually, even in the winter, you know, it'll evaporate a little bit. Waiting on the
I did have a resignation.
Can you believe we're going to start
Early?
We're going to start 4 minutes early.
Oh, wait a minute, let me go see what.
What?
Easy. Excuse me, I'm just stall.
Does that mean you keep us, you guys go 4 minutes early?
All right. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, this was an interesting lesson for me to even try to figure out. Because in essence, we're doing the entire Pentateuch. Except, I mean, we've done Genesis,
Yeah.
and we did the first part of Exodus.
Yeah.
Basically, we're doing 3.5 books of the Bible in about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
I didn't get all this reading done.
Well, that's okay.
I need to.
So I'm taking this approach. I gave you an outline today that is sort of an outline of the part of the story that they talk through. I'm going to let the videos sort of speak for themselves, and I'm going to just hit on a couple of high story points. So to start out with, a quick review, which I thought would be fun. So we started out.
I'm gonna go shut that door. We think it's still open.
Oh, it might be, and it's probably cold.
Yeah, we're
Yes, it
closed.
is.
In the beginning, Julia shut the door. It's a lot. Hey, the one nice thing is we cut out Leviticus altogether. All right. So we started out. God created the universe. That's pretty cool. All right. And He creates the universe. He does all that kind of fun stuff. We talk about it's for His purpose, for His glory. And we get basically this garden that He takes. I think it's important to let the text say what it says. Adam was not formed in the garden. At least that's what the Bible says. The garden was formed, Adam was formed, and God placed Adam in the garden. Now, I think that's important to the story because God's taking him and putting him in that perfect environment, and then He creates Eve. All right, and Eve's really. I always like the thing where it says God created Eve, from Adam, not from his foot, so that she'd be under him, not from his head, so she would be above him, but middle, so that they would be equal. And I think that's a great way to look at it. So they're in the garden. How long are they in the garden? You've got no idea. They could have been in the garden for a million years. You just don't know, and the Bible really doesn't tell us. Okay. So somewhere along the line, we got a couple of things that happen. Satan, Lucifer, who's in heaven, rebels against God. Okay? When does that happen? Somewhere between chapter 2 and chapter 3. All right?
That's what she said.
Okay.
For the snake.
The snake.
Oh.
Yeah. And again, these pictures are just
I think
background.
it's a pretty picture.
Somewhere between chapter 2 of Genesis and chapter 3 of Genesis, Satan rebels against God. Lucifer rebels against God, and it's a pride thing. He rebels against God because he wants to take over God. Now, why is that? We don't know what the motive was, but we know that he wanted to take over. So what does he do? He comes down and he tempts Eve. And we got all that kind of fun stuff, and didn't end well. They get kicked out of the garden because basically they disobeyed God. God gave Adam and Eve free will to do as they wish, within the confines of the instructions that he gave them, God gave them at that time. Okay? So at that time. So they basically disobey God, say, I'm going to go on my way. God kicks him out. And then we get the fun story of Cain and Abel, yippee yahoo, and then life goes on. The world gets populated. And the world gets populated, and it all turns to
Rubbish. Rubbish.
use an adjective that you feel is appropriate for the situation. So basically, it goes on for a time, and then we get the wonderful statement in Genesis chapter 6 that the sons of God and the daughters of men liked each other and created what? Hope we think that's what it seems like, is they created the race of Nephilim. All right, and we get that they created there were giants in the land, and all of a sudden, within a short period of time, from the scripture standpoint, we get
Don't move it yet.
okay.
I'm assuming you put that up there for a reason?
Yeah, the giants in the land.
Okay, so where was that?
I don't know
Estimated or whatever.
I don't know the detail of it. I know it's National Geographic, and that's a little person right there. And that's a skull. You see the other person right there? Give you a sense of size.
In the belly button area, that's a person?
That's a person right there, and you see the person right there.
Oh,
Big, you can tell by the legs
and this is for real? I know
Pretty sure.
it says that.
Pretty
but that
sure
doesn't
it's
mean
Photoshop.
Yeah.
It's for real?
It's not photoshopped. I mean, it's National Geographic magazine. Yeah. I mean, so there are you won't hear it, but there is archaeological proof of giants. Now, are they the missing link? Is that evolution? Hey, I don't know. Is it space aliens? No.
There's no missing link because there's no such thing as all that.
So anyways, we get the giants in the land. We get this little statement, and there were giants in the land. And all of a sudden, God is not pleased, and we get the flood. After the flood, so he pulls Noah out, pulls his family out, pulls out all of the basically seven animals that are clean, 2 animals that are unclean, or you get all that stuff, and we get the flood. And we get the family of Noah basically repopulating the earth. We go on for a period of time. Everything's all great, happy, and then we get the Tower of Babel, where the people have come together and basically want to be their own gods. They're building a Tower of Babel, and the Spanish Inquisition people down here are marching around. Again, it's a representation. So the Lord basically says, whoa, this isn't good. We need to separate them and confuse their language. So we get the nations. The nations basically, we separate their language, we separate them, and now they are nations. And then God pulls out a people for himself.
That's when I want the copy. Thank you.
Okay. And so God pulls out Abram and Sarah. And all of a sudden, he starts to promise that we're going to have a nation of priests for God. All right? We know the story. We get the wonderful baby that finally comes along after all the mess that they made. And then we finally get to the point that we get Esau and Jacob. You know, we go through that whole family tree. Esau should have been the number one dude, but Jacob sort of stole it from him. So Jacob becomes Israel. He has a beautiful family, 4 wives, 12 boys, 1 daughter. Can't be a problem there. And then we get to where we were a little bit last week, where we get the wonderful favoritism of a parent with Joseph. Joseph ends up going down to Egypt and becoming, little family rivalry, sell your brother into slavery, and he saves them from Egypt, from famine by taking them to the land of Egypt. Now, movie plug for you.
Yeah.
Patterns of Evidence
Yeah, he did this morning.
from Exodus.
Yeah.
That is where this stuff has come from. It is an outstanding look of Exodus. It's a documentary. It's about 2 hours long. There will be a few points that you fall asleep, but it's okay because I'm sure they'll serve popcorn. But it's really, really awesome.
They're going to have a sanctuary, you said this morning.
Yeah.
Not here.
Okay. It's excellent. So I highly recommend going to see that. That same guy is coming out with a movie in March of Patterns of Evidence on Moses.
No, yeah, he said that, but it'll be in the movie.
It'll be in the movie
theater.
theater.
Not, we won't be able to get it yet.
Yep.
That Tuesday.
So let me keep going. So the family, which is about 70 folks, moved down from the land of Canaan into the Goshen area. And that's where Genesis ends. And basically we pick up where they have the family, and you got to think of it that way, the family of Israel explodes in population. The Pharaoh no longer remembers who Joseph was, and they're put into bondage. Just like God told Abram it would happen before it happened. Amazing. So we get this little dude named Moses. All right? Should have been killed. Should have been killed. But he wasn't killed. And he ends up being raised by Pharaoh's daughter in Pharaoh's household. And he, in the normal thing, in God's plan, he murders someone. Right? Moses, who we hold in high esteem, is a murderer. Okay? But God chose him. And he goes into the wilderness for 40 years in Midian, and he's tending the sheep, and all of a sudden, God wants to talk to him. So how does God talk to you? He sets a bush on fire. All right? So he sets the bush on fire. He tells Moses, you're going to do what I asked you to do. You're going to go and set your people free. And just like all good people, he said, what? Not me. I can't do that. I can't speak well. So, anyways, as he finally goes down and does his thing, and he goes to Pharaoh, we get the 10 plagues, we get finally the escape and the Passover, we get the escape from Egypt, we get the parting of the Red Seas, we get Pharaoh chasing them, and they get swallowed up by the water. And then 3 months after this happens, we end up in the wilderness. In basically what they think is Mount Sinai. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to show you, I'll show it to you real quick. Here's a map, and we're going to come back to this map later. They don't know where Mount Sinai is. There is a monastery on a mountain, and they say that's where it was. They don't really know, okay? If you are hiking in the desert, you're not going to leave a trail, All right, so they're not building anything. They're nomads. So there's very, very little archaeological evidence to show where their trek was.
What about where they all died?
Well, I mean,
You would think. there
you would
was
think
Maybe some.
Bones or.
bones and stuff, but yeah, I mean, a lot of that's gonna be sucked
Well,
up by the
evidently
desert.
it wasn't very important.
No?
And that is probably the best thing to say because who knows? So I sort of think that it's this blue trail, and the reason being is that's the way Moses went back to Egypt, or at least that's the way they think he went back.
Yeah, the thing is way down there. I didn't know how far he was.
Yeah, because Midian, where's that point? Where he ended up is over here. Okay, so where he was tending his sheep. Remember, here's Egypt over here. He basically, and obviously Israel's here. He basically, ran and ended up over here, and then came back over that way. Great, wonderful. So we're in Mount Sinai, and so it takes them 3 months to sort of wander here. So they get to Mount Sinai, and now things start to happen. So, question. I want you to, some of you guys it's going to be easier than others. Some of you guys you're going to have to go way back. But, here's a question. When you were a child.
Oh, that's
A lot. Where he was getting at.
when
Really
you,
big, funny.
I believe 80 years.
I know 80 years ago.
but when you were a child, how did you picture our image God? Imagine God.
Well, in my Sunday school room, they had a picture of him, because in the robe with the white hair and the white beard.
All right.
My mother had a dinner plate
Okay.
that had a picture of Jesus.
Okay.
So that's how I got to look all of my life. And I've got that dinner plate
I'll be.
in my dressing room.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes, and it's a very, very nice picture of Jesus. But then the film came out and the little boy said, it doesn't look anything like that.
Well, kind of like Adam and Eve, no, that's certainly not the way they look, but it's retouched for like a movie or something.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
They-
Sure. But so what was your impression of God? That's your first impression of God. You got pictures of him, that visual. What about you guys?
Well, there was always a difference between God and Jesus.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay. How has that childhood vision of God changed?
Yeah.
Drastically?
Yeah, now it's nebulous. I have no picture
Okay.
in my mind.
All right.
I have a presence. Seriously.
Oh, that's good.
That's all I have. Or a spirit. I can't. Yeah, it's completely different.
That's good.
Good and bad. It's just.
I didn't have a picture in my head because when I can remember thinking about him, all I knew was, he was called Father, and I didn't need another father in my life that was going to hurt me like my dad did. So I didn't really try to picture what he looked like. For many, many, many years. I had more of a picture of Jesus, not
Okay.
of God.
Okay. And that's fair. Because if you think about the Old Testament, God was invisible,
Right.
and the angel of the Lord, which
That's-
we've talked
yeah,
about, is the sort of physical presence.
Did any of you happen to see the movie last night of Michelangelo and the painting of the Sistine Chapel?
No.
And the picture that he painted of God?
Yeah. Yep. He talked about that in that first session. Yeah. Okay. So sit back. Okay, we're going through 2 chapters tonight, so I'm going to show the kiddie video first, and we're going to go back to back. So they're short, but we'll go. Is this chapter 5 and chapter 6? I think it is. So chapter 5 and chapter 6 back to back, and it's all in the wilderness. So buckle up.
Okay.
Oh, wait a second.
They didn't like it.
I was on the wrong slide, that's why.
That was how Chris pictured that.
That's how Chris pictured it, like a song, like a good one.
The Israelites set out on a long desert journey back to their homeland. God guided them with a pillar of fire at night and a cloud by day. As the Israelites set up camp at the base of Mount Sinai, a dark cloud covered the mountaintop. Thunder boomed and lightning filled the sky. Terrified, the people backed away from the mountain. But Moses climbed up into the dark cloud. The ground began to shake. God spoke to Moses from a blazing fire on the mountaintop. Here is how my people should live. Don't worship anything but me. Don't misuse or disrespect my name. Set aside a day each week to rest. Honor your parents. Don't murder, steal, or lie. Live purely and faithfully. Don't lust after someone else's spouse or their possessions. When Moses told the people these commands, they said, "We'll do everything God said." On the mountaintop, God gave him stone tablets detailing the laws and commands inscribed by God's own finger. When Moses returned to their camp, he found the Israelites in a wild party, worshiping a golden idol they made. The people said, "We want to follow a God that we can see." Burning with anger, Moses threw the tablets, breaking them into pieces. Then he ground their idol into powder, mixed it with water, and made them drink it. Moses begged God to forgive his people. God said to him, "I'm full of compassion and love and slow to get angry. If my people obey my commands, then I'll show my power through them." After giving Moses a new set of tablets, God said, "Build a special place for me to live among the people I love." So Moses gathered the very best craftsmen and built a sacred tent called the tabernacle in the center of the camp. When God was present inside the tent, a cloud appeared above it during the day and a pillar of fire at night. When the cloud moved, the people followed and continued their long journey back to their homeland. As the Israelites journeyed through the desert, they began to complain. They were tired of eating manna and wanted meat like they had when they were slaves in Egypt. Frustrated by their complaining, God gave the Israelites exactly what they wanted. A huge wind blew an enormous flock of quail right into their camp. They had so much quail, they ate it for every meal for a month. It was literally coming out of their nostrils. Not long after this, the Israelites continued their journey toward the Promised Land. They came to the outskirts of a city called Canaan. Moses sent spies ahead to see if the city was a good place to live and how tough the battle might be to take it over. The spies came back and told him the land was amazing, flowing with milk and honey and all kinds of fruit. But the people living there were huge, like giants, and that it would be impossible to defeat them. But two of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, told the Israelite leaders they should go into Canaan because God was on their side. The leaders refused, becoming so angry at Joshua and Caleb that they almost executed them. Because the Israelites didn't believe that God would help them, God sent them to wander in the desert for 40 years. In the desert, the Israelites were having trouble finding water and began to complain. So God told Moses to speak to a rock and water would flow from it. Moses trusted God, but only partly. He not only spoke to the rock, but struck it with his walking stick. When he did, water gushed from the rock. God wasn't happy with Moses' lack of trust and punished him by allowing him to see the promised land, but not enter it. Moses was getting pretty old and looked for someone to take over for him as leader. He chose Joshua. Just before he died, Moses stood before the entire nation of Israel and told them the story of how God had promised land to Abraham, freed them from slavery in Egypt, and had even given them commands to live by as God's special people. When he finished, Moses climbed a nearby mountain. God showed him all of the promised land, and Moses died.
He does all that work and then he paints over.
I know.
So, come back. I love when this happens when the internet gets disconnected. So, when we look at where we're at, this first section, this first chapter 5, you know, you can break it down into a couple things. First of all, we got to put it into a little bit of perspective. To get from where they were in Goshen to Canaan is about like going from San Antonio up 35 to Fort Worth. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, you're not talking a long trip. You know what I mean? So it took them 3 months, and forgive me. Okay. Until I get it back, I'm going to have to sort of play a little bit. But it took them 3 months to get from where they were into Goshen, and if you remember where it came down to where they thought Mount Zion was. 3 months. Okay? That's probably good. That's not like bad. Okay? But a lot happened in that 3 months. And then what happened is when they get to Mount Zion, they're there for a year. Okay? So what we're talking about here took them 3 months to get there, and then they're parked there for a year. They're parked at Mount Zion for a year.
Do you know why?
Well, think about it. They get the 10 Commandments. What we didn't go through is they get, we didn't read about it. They get all the laws, okay? All of the laws about sacrifices, all of the laws about how to work with each other. If an ox falls into a hole and it's your fault, then all those things, okay? So they get all the laws, and then they get the sort of the order of the camp, okay? So they get the instructions for the tabernacle. They all have to bring stuff to make the tabernacle, and then they get the order of how they're going to be camped. They basically are starting to learn how to become a nation, all right? And so it takes them a year, all right? Now, they're already gotten their manna. They've already gotten all that stuff. But they're learning how to be a nation. Well, during this time, Moses goes up and gets the 10 Commandments, and we'll read about that here after the video. And then they all hear the 10 Commandments. Then he goes up to the mountain, all right? And then when he's up in the mountain, he's there for 40 days, all right? So he's there for a month. Well, it took him 3 months to get here. And in 1 month, they're already like, this is ridiculous. That guy's gone. He's gone up into the mountains. A bird ate him or whatever. He's buzzard food. Let's have fun.
It says when they left Egypt to get here, it was 5 months.
3 months.
And so all the flocks and all that they took with them are dead and gone?
No, they're not. But you got to remember, even today, not even today, but during biblical times, they really didn't eat a lot of meat. They really didn't eat a lot of meat. When they had if you remember the story of the prodigal son, where basically they grabbed the heifer and had a barbecue. That was very special. All right, so yeah, they still have all their flocks.
But they want this manna.
Well, they get the manna, and they get the water, and the quail come a little bit later. I mean, we'll learn that at the end. But basically, they're already giving up a little bit. I mean, that sort of tells you how whacked out these folks were. But again, they were in slavery, so they were getting. I can't even explain. But let me ask you this question. Hopefully, you didn't see it when I went too fast. That's what the mountainous region of the Sinai Peninsula looks like. It's not pleasant.
No.
All right? It's not pleasant. And it would not be easy to travel on foot with animals and kids and all that. I mean, it would be a trek. It would be hot. All right? And finding your way through that, you can't go straight. You know what I mean? You got to go in between all that stuff because you're not going over top of those mountains. You're going around. But thinking about the Ten Commandments. Okay, first of all, okay.
We don't know what that guy's doing.
That's all right. I can't get to it. But thinking about the Ten Commandments, and I might have to slide after the video. That's what it is. But I'll ask it beforehand. Why did God give Moses the Ten Commandments?
So for his people to live by.
Okay. Moral code. Right?
What did she say, moral?
Moral code. Yeah.
The instructions for how to order our business.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Ten Commandments, and you can see this on this tabernacle thing. On the last page of it is the Ten Commandments. And basically, it's really broken up into our relationship with God and our relationship with each other. All right? But I think you all got it right. We get a code of conduct, all right, of how we're supposed to interact with God and how we're supposed to interact with our people. Jesus put it simply, love the Lord your God with all your soul, mind, soul, yada, yada, yada. And love your neighbors as yourself. That's the Ten Commandments, all right? The Ten Commandments break it down into a little bit bigger detail, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but that's what it is. Now here's a question for you. I went through the beginning part of where we started and where we are now for a reason. Why did God pick this moment to give him the Ten Commandments?
What about because God has a sense of humor. What about when he was giving them to Moses? He knew exactly, of course, what the people were doing already.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't wait too long.
Right.
And so, of course, number one is the biggie. When he got back down the mountain of.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're going to start here.
Maybe
We're going to start our lesson here.
Tell them about it.
It's time.
But why didn't he give the Ten Commandments to Abraham? Or let's go back. Why didn't he give them to Adam?
Because it was not his family.
It wasn't
the
in the
Israelites
plan.
was there.
God's time.
God's time.
Einstein, yeah, because he knew now there's a nation that had something.
One other thing that's always stood out to me about the of course, the Ten Commandments and then the 600 other following laws was to just show the people that they couldn't do it.
Yeah.
No matter how simple, no matter how hard, no matter how rigid,
Yep.
they couldn't do it.
They couldn't do it on their own. Okay. While I think the video's next, and while the video's going, I'll try to fix this thing so I actually know where I am in my outline. But let's listen to the first video, and then really after the video, I'm going to focus in a little bit more on the Ten Commandments, and then the tabernacle part of it. So what you
can rephrase the
yeah.
Fire.
Yes.
Okay.
This is your story. This is my story. But most of all, this is the greatest story ever told. This is God's story. Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor.
A 5-year-old girl was having one of those trouble-filled days. After her mother had reprimanded her several times for being disobedient, she finally lost her patience with her daughter's willful behavior. "Jenny, you go sit down in that chair in the corner right now, and don't get up until I tell you," she said sternly. The little girl went to the chair, sat down, and after a few minutes called her mother. "Mommy, I'm sitting down on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside." It's in our nature to stand up on the inside. It's in our nature to struggle with authority and other people telling us what to do. It's why a lot of people have a hard time with God and the 10 Commandments. They see God as up there and distant, like a judge, or the principal's office, or the Wizard of Oz. They see God casting down all these rules and regulations, and then watching them, and eventually catching them doing wrong so he can punish them, and even enjoying it in the process. Cosmic killjoy. Well, as we open up chapter 5 of the story, which contains the giving of the 10 Commandments to the nation of Israel, nothing could be further from the truth. Instead of getting lost in the details, let's see if we can rise above and capture how this fits into the upper story plan of God to get us back. In chapter 4, we saw how God freed the Israelites from 400 years of bondage in Egypt. They are now on the other side of the Red Sea in the desert. If all goes well, it'll only take them a few short months before they reach Canaan, the land God told Abraham 600 years ago he would one day give his offspring. The opening line in chapter 5 of the story tells us that they are 3 months into their journey when they come to the Sinai desert. God said to the Israelites through Moses, "Did you see everything I did for you to get you out of Egypt? I lifted you out of there like you were flying on wings of an eagle. I revealed to you my name and my power. Hopefully by now, you know that I am the one true God who loves you. Well, if you're ready to take it to the next level, I'd like to do that. I want to come down and dwell with you. Not from up there, but from down here among the people." God wanted to come down and dwell with them. This is the vision we see in the Garden of Eden from chapter 1. This is what God wants. This is what God wants to get back. But sin changed everything and ruined the vision and separated us from God. And while God has interacted with certain people since the garden, this is the first time he has determined to come down and dwell with the people again. But for this to happen, some things need to be worked out. 3 things in particular. God instructs Moses to leave the people and head to the top of Mount Sinai, and there he will give them the 3 things. Number 1, if I come down, there has to be guidelines on how you treat me and how you treat each other. In our human community, we can be pretty rough on each other. We can be cruel to each other. It's a direct result of the sin nature within us. We hurt, we hurl, and we hoard. We attack, we withdraw. But in God's community, things are different. People are treated with full dignity and full respect. No hurting, no hurling, no hoarding, no attacks, and no withdrawing. This is what the 10 Commandments are. The first 4 deal with our relationship with God. Commands 5 through 10 deal with our relationship with each other. Now you can find the list in chapter 5. But boy, would I have loved to have been there when God etched these principles in stone with his divine laser finger. The second thing that God tells Moses is this: if I come down, I'll need a place to stay. Exodus chapter 25 tells us, then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Make this tabernacle and all of its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you. If you look in chapter 5, we are told, from that time on, God's presence would reside in the tabernacle, a portable tent of worship. God is going to come down and dwell in this tent or tabernacle right in the camp of Israel. This is unbelievable. Something you need to know. While God's presence was dwelling in their camp, they couldn't meet with God directly. There was a room in the tabernacle called the most holy place where God resided. Only the high priest was allowed to enter there, and only once a year at that. But nonetheless, God's presence was with him. But there's one more final instruction for Moses before he comes down from the mountain. If I'm going to come down, sin must be atoned for. Now remember, the main thing that keeps us separated from God is our sin nature. We are all conceived in our mother's womb with one, and we can't get rid of it on our own. We have already learned in previous chapters that the blood of another must be shed to cover our sins. And while there's already been animal sacrifices in the Bible, the official sacrificial system is put in place because God is no longer going to be up there, but down here. In order for this to happen, in order for God's presence to actually be among the people, the sin nature has to be covered by the blood of animals without defect and constantly. The book of Leviticus contains page after page of instructions on how the priests are to go about offering these sacrifices. Okay, how does Israel do? Well, Moses has been gone for 40 days. And when he comes down to the base of the mountain, he discovers that they've engaged in a practice we'll just call mad cow worship. They constructed a cow out of gold jewelry that they had and started worshiping it. In just under 40 days, they have already broken the first 2 commandments. And Moses is pretty hot. The instigators that made the plot are executed. Moses crushes the golden calf into 1,000,000 pieces and makes them drink. Boy, am I glad I wasn't there to see how all that came out. Well, what transpires in the next few pages is both tough and tender. The deal of God coming down is almost a bust. But Moses goes to God and pleads with him to forgive the Israelites, to put all the blame on Moses and to reconsider. The Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Then Moses said to him, if your presence doesn't go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? So that's exactly what happens. This is a big shift in the story. God is once again dwelling with his people, the chosen people of Israel. His presence is with them and will distinguish them from all other nations and all other peoples, even though they could never keep their part of the deal. Chapter 5 ends with this beautiful summary. And this new nation was to be different, so that all the world would know and worship the one true God, the very source of life and hope. You know, God wants the same thing today. The God of the upper story wants to come down and do life with us in the lower story. But the same 3 things need to be in place. There will have to be guidelines on how we treat God and how we treat each other. We are called to love God and to love our neighbor, just as Israel was. How can we be expected to do any better than they did? How can we stand up for God's principles, not only on the outside, but from the inside? Is there something different for us that will help us succeed? He will need a place to stay. If that isn't in a tabernacle, then where might that place be? And finally, God says sins must be atoned for in order for his presence to be among us. Are we supposed to be sacrificing young, unblemished lambs today, or has something changed? Well, those answers are coming in the pages ahead, but right now, we need to make Moses' prayer our prayer. If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all other people on the face of the earth?
Okay. So hopefully I get to keep this thing going.
Which one about those three things where it was in the Bible? Is it the end of this?
Well, no, he's taking them and making a list out of it. It's not like a scripture
It's not like
reference.
scripture.
It's not a scripture
Okay.
reference. But you get it when you think of it this way. The Ten Commandments is basically how you're in a relationship with God and how you're in a relationship with others. That's number one. Number two is build me a tabernacle. I need a place to stay. And number three is atonement, which is for them the offering system, all of the offerings and the sin offerings and the wave offerings and all that stuff. So those are the three things that during this time period. So in Exodus 19, it starts out in the third month after the sons of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt. On that very day, they came into the wilderness of Sinai. So that gets us that we're here in this particular time, and now we get all these instructions. So the thing that, what happened in chapter 19 was basically God gave Moses instructions about, I'm coming down. And I don't want anybody coming close to the mountain. I'm going to come down on this mountain and I'm going to talk to the people, but they can't come close to me. All right? Consecrate yourself, and on the third day I will come and talk with you. Isn't the foreshadowing? I mean, in the Old Testament, we get some things going on right now. I mean, Andy Stanley, who's a great preacher in Atlanta, basically is saying you don't need to worry about the Old Testament. We're in the New Covenant. Well, the Old Testament so much foreshadows what's coming in the New Testament that to ignore the Old Testament is to lose all of the just beautiful depth of God's promise. All right? That's just one thing, but I mean, it's just beautiful to see this foreshadow. He sits there, this nation isn't even formed yet. All right? And he's sitting there, consecrate yourself, and on the third day I will come down and talk. If you don't see Jesus in that already, it's crazy. But, so we get to the Ten Commandments. And we're going to read these. I'm going to read pretty much the whole chapter 20. Because there's some interesting things there. And you'll get it in a little bit. But they consecrate themselves and they set up. Now, it doesn't say in the Bible that they set up a barrier or a fence. But it makes sense that they would. Okay? So if you can imagine this, there's that mountain. They set up a sort of a barricade. And now God comes down to them. And at least in my mind, I always thought, as just not studying the scripture, but hearing the story of the Ten Commandments, that Moses went up, got the Ten Commandments, and brought them down. It's not the case.
That's not what it says.
It's not the case. So let's read along with me, or follow along with me. I'm going to read in chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20, just starting at the top. Then God spoke all these words, saying, so he's there in front of everybody. He is saying this from the cloud to the entire congregation. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on earth beneath, and this is an interesting line, or in the water under the earth. Just stop there for a second. I wonder if that isn't the place where the demons are shut up right now.
Mine just says in the waters below.
Okay, and let's see. Okay, again, I'm using NASB, but the interesting thing is here. There's 3 spots: heaven, earth, and below the sea. Interesting. Under the water. Okay. You shall not worship or serve them, for I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers on the children, on the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands to those who love me and kept my commandments. A little pause here. Iniquities of the fathers onto their children of the 3rd and 4th generations. Think about when they were going, the people that hate him. Think about when they were going into the land and he said, wait, their time has not yet come. Just throwing that out there. Now we'll keep going. Verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Now that vain word, it's not something, it doesn't come out in the English really the way it is. Do not take it in vain, emptiness, vanity, falsehood, lying speech, worthlessness. It's so much deeper than vain. It's not, oh God. Yeah, okay. All right. It's really not
guiltless.
Guiltless? Okay. It's really taking, to me, and making almost God worthless.
My Bible is the Aramaic.
Okay.
And the way it reads in it is, you shall not take a false oath in the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not declare him innocent who takes an oath in his name falsely.
And I think that's a good one too. But it's that vein is so much deeper in the Hebrew meaning than it is that it comes out in English to me. Okay, we'll keep going on. You should not take the okay. Remember. Oh, I missed something, didn't I?
No.
Oh, I did? Okay. Remember this the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the 7th day is holy, is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work. You or your sons or your daughters or your male or your female servants or your cattle or your sojourners who stay with you. Everybody. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the seas and all that were in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. All right? So that's how we relate to God.
Okay, isn't the Sabbath day really Saturday? Even though we go to church on Sunday?
In the Jewish tradition, yes, it is Saturday. In the Christian tradition, we pulled Sunday in because that was the day of resurrection for the Lord, for Jesus. So yeah, in Jewish, it's Saturday. And,
It's any day you may.
Friday night was every night.
well, now you get a whole bunch of craziness there. Not to go too deep, but there's actually 2 different types of ways to look at it depending if you were in the northern or the southern kingdom.
Okay.
We're not going to go there.
Yeah.
But the idea is to take a frickin' break. All right? And to take a break in honor of what the Lord has done. That's the key thing. It's not just to take a break for you to rest and relax, which that is part of it, but it's to honor God. So now, how do we relate to everybody else? Honor your father and your mother. Now, first one that comes with a reward, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. Honor your father and mother, and there's a reward to that. All right?
You'll live long.
You'll live long. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And then you shall not cover your neighbor's house. And then we just go into coveting a lot more. And you ever wonder why we just say you should not covet, but man, he goes. You shall not cover your neighbor's house. You shall not cover your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servants, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. All the people. Now here's this. So there's your 10 Commandments. Now here's the thing that is so cool to me. All the people perceived the thunder and the lightning flashes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw, they trembled and stood at a distance. Everybody in the camp heard God speak. All the and then where am I? Okay. And then they said to Moses, all right, speak to us yourself, we will listen. But let not God speak to us, or we will die. Okay? Now, this is so consistent with any time someone comes in Scripture to hear either God's voice or an angel or whatever it may be. They are terrified. All right? They are terrified. Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may remain with you, so that you may not sin. Get that? God sat there on the mountain. It's a total different picture, I think, than what we get today when we think of the 10 Commandments. We think of Moses getting it chiseled and bringing it down. But no. Everybody heard the voice of God give these commandments, and they were terrified. And Moses tells you the reason that God did that is he was testing you, and he wanted you. That word fear is reverent. Reverent. Okay. He wanted the people to understand, I am your God. Isn't that cool?
I don't think I ever knew this, to be honest.
Listen, I didn't. I mean, I had my childhood. My childhood 10 Commandments. All right, and it wasn't this.
No.
It wasn't them sitting on the mountaintop, and hearing it. It was Moses coming down. No, they're like, man, I don't want to hear from God anymore. It's too terrifying. And you know what? I probably would get that. I mean, I'd probably be the same way. So we get the 10 Commandments, and then we get a whole bunch of laws, all right, that we're not going to go over. So we get this first thing, which is, here is your moral code. And let me tell you something. There has never been anything like this beforehand. And we still follow these codes today. You'll hear about the Code of Hammurabi, all right, which happened really before these laws. But these are nothing. Those are nothing like the 10 Commandments. This is God speaking to his people, a nation that he wants to be priests, to bring all of the other nations back to him. All right? It is cool to think about. So then,
It's also amazing that it breaks down into 5 and 5 and 5 for God, for and it actually sort of sets the scene for when Christ came, and he then said, "Love the Lord your God with all your love, and love everyone else."
he broke it down to 2.
It's all succinct, and
Yeah.
you shouldn't have trouble remembering it.
Absolutely not.
That's why it's so hard to believe that a golden calf happened so quickly. Because I mean, if you've heard the voice of God,
I
wouldn't that
know.
be enough to keep you for?
Well, that just,
for a while?
well, I guess one of the things that does is it gives me.
Now I'm confused, tell me again.
Well, so after this, God comes down, everybody hears it, and the cloud is still up here on the mountain.
is shaking.
All right, and Moses then goes up into the cloud.
That's why he goes
All right,
up.
he goes up into the mountain, and he gets the rest of these laws. He gets the 10 Commandments put into the stone. All right, and he's up there for 40 days. And get this too, that cloud is there during this whole time. So everybody around it is seeing it, okay? And yeah, then you get Aaron doing the golden calf thing. And it's just like, you're sitting there going, first of all, like you say, it's hard to believe. It makes me feel good in some instances because it shows the weakness of all of us. If I'm in that congregation and I've heard God's voice and I've seen all of this and I still don't believe or fail.
How in the word could you not?
I know, but it gives me a little bit of peace. If they saw it and still had problems. Okay, if I have my doubts of faith, sometimes I lack faith. You know what? I guess we're all okay.
Yeah.
I guess we're all okay because they saw it and they had no lack of faith. So let me keep going. All right, because I'm skipping over Aaron. I'm skipping over the bad stuff. I'll tell you that. So then you get the tabernacle. I have given you this. This is a really cool resource. This comes from Rose Publishing, and basically, so what I want you to understand about the tabernacle is this: God created the Garden of Eden and put Adam and Eve in there, and was going to create that environment, and they were going to create that environment. They were going to tend the garden. Didn't work. They screwed up. Okay? So God says, I'm going to come and dwell with you. Here is the instructions for the tabernacle. The instructions for this tabernacle will eventually be the temple. That temple will eventually be, you got the first temple, Solomon's temple, or really I call it David's temple because David's the one that got everything. Solomon just built it. All right. Then you've got Herod's temple, which is after the Babylonian captivity, they came back and Nehemiah, Ezra, built the temple, and then Herod basically did some improvements. So we call it the Herod temple. That would be what Jesus saw. Okay, and that got destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. And eventually we're going to have a third temple that goes into the tribulation period. And eventually we're going to have the new temple, the new Jerusalem. Well, what we find out here is this temple is God's throne room recreated on earth of what it's like for him in heaven. Now, I'm just going to point out a couple of things. So, you can see it on your paper, but you've got the tent. The whole tent and complex is about half the size of an American football field. Okay, it's about half the size, so it's about the 50-yard line to the end zone. All right, to give you a little bit of perspective. So you got the court, all right, where they're doing, you got the altars and all that stuff, where they're doing all the offerings for atonement. And we're not going to go through the offerings tonight. One day we'll do that. But then you've got the tabernacle or the tent itself, and that's amazing the way it's created. Okay, and I'm not going to go through that. But you've got two sections. You've got the showbread. You've got the candlestick. When we went through the beginning of Revelation, and we were talking about where is Jesus right now, and he was among the candlesticks. You see where that's coming from? interesting, okay? And then we got the veil here, and then the Ark of the Covenant, which is basically where he doesn't sit, he's a spirit, but where he dwelt, okay? So we get this veil, and we get the Ark of the Covenant here. That's the Holy of Holies, okay? This was recreated in Jerusalem with the temple. Here's the interesting thing. The room that was the Holy of Holies is the exact dimensions of this tabernacle. The thought is, and it's a thought, it's scholars thinking, and you got rabbinic stuff, is that they actually set the tent up in the temple when it was built, and that ended up being the Holy of Holies. Now, Jews won't even walk on the top of the Temple Mount because they don't know where the Holy of Holies is. Very interesting. But what you've got is this is God saying, I need a place to come down. This is the place. And this place matches heaven in his throne room.
Well, wasn't that his plan all along, was to make everything down here on earth with match everything?
That's right. It's supposed to be one. It's supposed to be one. So I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, if you ever want to have fun, I mean, it is really going through the tabernacle, then the temple, and going through the meaning of each one of these implements, each one of the candlesticks, the brazen altar, the showbread, all that stuff, and see how every bit of it points not only to heaven, but to Jesus. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And then everybody thinks Leviticus is the most boring book, but Jesus is in every one of those, basically, the offerings, the sacrifices. Everything points to Jesus. It is so...
We're reading First and Second Chronicles, and that was all about this one.
Yeah.
We did every dimension, it's talking about everything, it's all on this one.
So take this resource, eat it up.
Yeah.
All right? But it goes further than that. That's the tabernacle. Okay? This little complex right here is the tabernacle. But he also tells the tribes how to basically camp around the tabernacle. Okay? Now, where the tribes are, where the Levites are, it tells them exactly where to camp. And when you got to remember, they are spending a year in Sinai. All right, they're spending a year getting all this under control. They have not even moved yet. But when they move, which is when we're going to get into the next one, and oh boy, when we get into the next chapter of this, basically they move in a particular order. Now the thing is, if you look, sometimes this could be a reach, but when you look down, what does it create? Tell me that God isn't pointing everything to Christ in everything that's happening. And you got to remember, this nation is 3 months old. 3 months old as a nation. Yes, they've been a tribe. Yes, they've been a people. This is when they become a nation. A nation of priests. So, I'm going to kick it into second gear here. All right? So, we're going to go into the next chapter. And the next chapter really breaks down into one word. Complain. All right? I was going to say something else, but I'm going to keep it clean. All right? I love, John Gordon is one of the sort of positive guys that I love. And he has a book called The No Complaint Book. And it's perfect for what we're going to go into. You should have a piece of paper called, that basically have 3 no complaint tools, which is the but positive technique. I don't like to drive to work for an hour, but I'm thankful I have a job. All right? Focus on the get to instead of the have to. All right? I get to go to work. all right? And then turn a complaint into a solution. I love that. Wouldn't that have been great if they...
And the Hebrews back then, maybe not back then, but the Hebrews in Jesus' time, they would go through every time they woke up. Thank you, Lord, that I woke up.
Oh, yes.
Thank you that I have clothes to put on my back. Thank you that I can use the restroom. Thank you that all throughout the whole day, they're thanking the Lord for everything that's going on in their life.
Let me see if I can find it real quick. I just, in sort of honor of Holocaust, I've been reading the night books by Ellis, I can't remember his name, but yeah, I'm hoping I have it real quick here because I'm already going to be running late. Here's the blessing that the Jews would say at a special event. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has given us life, sustained us, and allowed us to reach this day. That is a Jewish prayer that they would say right before a sort of a big event. So, anyways, then you can see, if you turn on the other side, it gives you basically the instead of complaint. Why do I say that? Because we're going on a road trip now, and the kids are in the back seat, and they're complaining. So here's the video.
This is your story, this is my story. But most of all, this is the greatest story ever told. This is God's story. The Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites." At the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruits, but the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "So tell them, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very thing I heard you say. In this wilderness your bodies will fall. Every one of you 20 years old or more who was counted in the census and who has grumbled against me. Not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land, you will suffer for your sins and know what it is like to have me against you."
There's nothing like a vacation. The end destination might be the Grand Canyon or Jackson Hole, Wyoming, or the beaches of Destin, Florida, or even a foliage strip in the fall in the Northeast. The end destination is great once you arrive, but sometimes the road trip getting there is a whole other story. The most common aggravation of a road trip is the children's inability to handle the trip. When I was a kid, our family traveled in a wood-paneled station wagon. There were 6 of us crammed into one car. There were no TVs, no video games, no iPods to occupy our time. And we would wiggle, touch each other, get into each other's space, argue, and constantly call out to our dad, "Are we there yet?" My mom and dad would start off by reaching their arm to the back seat and smack us. Finally, my dad would blow a gasket and he'd say, "If you don't stop fighting, I'm going to turn this car around and head back home." Now, he never did it, but we always thought he was capable of it. The second major problem with road trips is when the driver makes a wrong turn and takes you way out of your way. This happened to Roseanne and me years ago. We were traveling back to Fort Worth from San Antonio I turned the wheel over to Roseanne so I could take a nap, and I told her to simply stay on this road until we arrived in Fort Worth. Now, how hard could that be? Well, several hours later, she woke me up saying, "Are we supposed to be in Houston?" I'm usually a nice guy, but this was well beyond my capacity to hold it in, and I expressed my extreme disappointment in her. This wrong turn cost us 5 hours. I took over the wheel and started heading back, only to discover that the place where we made the wrong turn was when I was driving. Of course, it's harder to make wrong turns today. We have the GPS, Global Positioning Satellite. There's this GPS gal, we call ours Karen, who has a view from above. She can see everything from beginning to end. She tells us when to turn right, and she tells us when to turn left. Ours does it in an Australian accent. She's really quite lovely. Whenever she tells me to turn right, and I have the hunch that left would be faster, she doesn't say, "I said turn right, you idiot." She just says in a calm voice, "Recalculating." Well, today we have come to chapter 6, and in this chapter, the story and Israel are on a spectacular road trip. Their end destination is Canaan, the land God promised to give the Israelites 650 years earlier. Moses is the driver. The children of Israel are in the back seat. They're driving across the desert of Sinai on their way to the fertile land of Canaan, a place flowing with milk and honey. Instead of 4 kids in the back seat, Moses has somewhere between 1 to 3 million kids. This experience will be like herding cats. The kids of Israel are starting to get restless. They start fighting and complaining in the back seat. 3 instances are recorded in the story. First, they complain about their general hardships. Then they complain about the food they have to eat. Finally, Miriam and Aaron get into it. They are Moses' brother and sister. They start doing that backseat driver kind of complaining. Why does Moses get to drive all the time? They question why God only speaks to Moses. On all 3 occasions, God pulls over the car and disciplines them. These 3 instances are not the only ones, just the ones recorded in the story. We are told that there are some 10 outbreaks of juvenile behavior from the children of Israel. Now, it's one thing for the kids to complain in the back seat. It's another thing altogether when the driver makes a wrong turn. This is what happens in Numbers chapter 13. Let me read it to you. The Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders." These 12 leaders are the drivers for their families, and whole tribes for that matter, and are going to explore the land of Canaan, the final destination, the land God is promising to give to them. Now remember, it's been over 400 years since any Israelite has seen this land. In chapter 6, it tells us that they're gone for 40 days and come back and give Moses a report. They tell him that the land is awesome, but that the people are numerous and gigantic, and that they would beat them up badly if they tried to take their land. So they decide not to move forward out of fear. The story tells us that God says back to them, recalculating. Because of their lack of trust in God, God is going to have them make a U-turn and head back down south again, along the Red Sea, back deep into the wilderness. A 40-year detour. Wow. Here's what captured my attention. Not only did their lack of trust in God's power cost them entrance into the land, they dragged their children into this mess also. Their children will suffer for their choice. Instead of growing up in a home with green backyards and swing sets and an awesome community, they're going to spend their entire childhood and beyond as nomads, wanderers in the wilderness. In this chapter we read, the story picks up again nearly 40 years later. The Israelites return to Kadesh. They are right back where they started 40 years ago, except this time, all those 20 years and older have died in the wilderness. Moses gathered this new generation of Israelites around them, and he tells them that they have a fresh opportunity to trust God, unlike their parents. That they need to recognize that God is leading them with the ultimate GPS, God's positioning satellite, and he can be trusted. They have a choice to make on whether they're going to take the turns that God instructs them to take, and they must keep in mind that they are not in the car alone. In the back seat are their children, who will be affected by their decisions, just like they experienced when their parents were at the wheel. Our life is like a road trip. God wants to lead us every step of the way from his GPS. God sees the picture from the upper story, and he wants the very best for us. And he wants us to make it to the final destination. He wants us to enjoy the journey, but we have to trust him. When he calls out left, we need to go left. When he calls out right, we need to go right. When he says stop, we need to stop dead in our tracks. When he says go faster, we need to put the pedal to the metal. When he says bust through the barrier, no matter how big and bad it looks, we need to charge ahead in faith, like a scene out of an old Dukes of Hazzard episode. You see, God's GPS is instructing us on how we can live in the upper story of God's blessing and purpose, and we would be fools not to follow it. We also need to be reminded that whatever choice we make, there are others in the car with us. They will experience the blessing of our good decisions, and they will experience the pain of our destructive decisions, as we've seen in our story today. God has a place of blessing he wants to take us to. In that place, as we live our lives for him, we will also be a blessing to other people around us, to serve them, to allow them to share in God's blessing in our life. We will be a blessing to them because as they see God working in us, they will want to follow this God too. But to get to this place, we must trust him.
Okay, we're going to fly.
Okay.
I'm going to give you a couple of stories because, like he said, they get to the land. So they've been in Sinai for a year, and then all of a sudden, it's time to hit the road. And so they get on a road and start going to Canaan. It's not that long of a trip, okay? Now, mind you, it's like taking the population of San Antonio and walking them to Dallas. And it's going to be slow. It's going to be slow, okay? But they're going to get there. But we get the spies. The spies go into the land, all right? And they spy out the land. And they say, you know what, man? It is awesome. But I want you to pay attention to this. There are giants in the land. Okay? Where did the giants come from? Because we know even when we get to David that they're still there, that Goliath guy. So the giants are still in the land. Hang on to that. All right? Now we get a couple of things that have, there's a couple of things that have always bothered me. When we get to the section of Meredith, where it's one of the rebellions, okay? They're complaining again, all right? And God tells Moses to go stand on a rock, and they're going to get water. Speak to the rock. And Moses hits the rock. Now,
The technicality, isn't it?
to me, it's like, you know, Moses does not get to go into the land because of this. All right? Now, I was going to read the scriptures, but they're there. You can read them yourself, okay? But he hits this rock twice when God only told him to speak. All right? And so it has always bothered me. And I'm going to, one day we'll get a chance to ask the question. God's God. God can do anything he wants to do. I guess. But man, that's
kind of mean.
But all he's gone through, he doesn't speak very well.
Yeah, I guess.
Oh,
I don't know. I just want to mention that the first one of these things was basically that, okay? And honestly, it got Moses into trouble, okay? Now, you got to remember something. At this point, we are now off the trail, and we're wandering. Up to the point where the spies went in, we were on the trail. Now we're in the wandering mode. And some amazing things happen in the wandering mode. The one that I always love is because I love the story of Nicodemus, is this story. the bronze serpent, which comes from the point where they are in the wilderness. And the story with bronze serpents is basically they're complaining again. So what he does is he puts up a serpent, and if they look into the serpent's eyes, they're healed. If not, they die. Jesus uses that as an example of what is him on the cross. And it's interesting, I mean, that sort of looks like the cross, doesn't it? I mean, it's far-fetched, but there you go. Anyways, I love that story. That comes from this wandering. And God used basically the free will disobedience of the nation as something that will be used for his purpose when Jesus is here. I love that. I also love funny stories. Okay? And the angel and Balaam. All right? You know this story? Okay, Balak hired Balaam to basically lie. All right? And it's important because Balak and Balaam come into play all the way to the end. You know, all the way in it. But anyway, Balaam's on a donkey, and the donkey is basically going through, and the donkey keeps stopping, and Balaam starts, you know, basically being harsh to the donkey, and then all of a sudden, the donkey starts talking to him. Now, here's the thing that always amazes me about this story. He wasn't surprised that the donkey was talking to him. Okay, he was not surprised that the donkey was talking to him, but then the other part of this that I like is we realize here that there's a visible and an invisible world, and that the invisible world can be made visible. Yes, because all of a sudden, the donkey's like, I'm stopped because there's a big angel with a sword. And he's like, can you make him see him? And all of a sudden, the guy sees the angel. And again, he's not surprised. He's like, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were there. And they go through this conversation with, why were you beating your donkey? Well, he wasn't going. Well, he wasn't going because I told him to stop. I was in the way. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. He's not surprised. But that's the thing that just completely, you know, you sit there and you read that story and you're like, well, you know, it's just a great story. And then you really think about it, and the donkey talks, and it's okay. And then an angel shows up there in full battle array, and it's okay. He wasn't surprised. That's amazing. I'm sorry, that's just amazing. Okay, so then we finally get through where everybody's dead. Marion's dead. Aaron's dead. Everybody that was over 20 years old is dead. And now, when the spies were in the land. So now all of a sudden, we are at the promised land. And God says to Moses, hey, it's about time for you to die. All right? That's what it says. That's what it says in the Bible. The Lord said, Moses, it's time for you to die. It's coming up quick. Let me take you up to the mountain so you can see where you could have gone, and then go and die. Okay? That's basically what he does. But if you get a chance, read that last song and really sermon in Deuteronomy where Moses is recounting the entire journey to this new generation and giving them instructions, and then in essence the ultimate in it's a total blessing, but it's the ultimate in basically handing off leadership, because Moses hands off leadership to Joshua in an amazing way. Now here's what's important to understand. Joshua doesn't do that when he's about ready to die. And that's where we get then into the Judges, because there's no leader anymore. So then we get the judges are up and down, up and down, and up and down, and that's two chapters away. But we
And then
get,
we get the king.
and then we get the kings, that's right. And then we get the split kingdom, and then we get the captivity. So, but Moses does this amazing thing of transferring leadership. And he transfers it to Joshua, who's got to be, I can't remember, I think it says in the Bible, I think he's got to be in his 60s, at least 60s.
Because was he not born, didn't he move with them?
Yeah, he was with them. Yeah, he was one of the spies. So he's
No, I mean, he wasn't in the
Well,
40s.
he's probably getting close to 80, somewhere between 60 and 80.
60 and 80, probably, is about right. So anyways, we get to the promised land, and we get all of this great stuff that's going on. But the big thing is, there's giants in the land, and Joshua, when we go into next week, is going after those giants and those people. And the thing that you have to remember, because one of the things that happens when people don't understand the Bible is they're like, well, God's a God of genocide. He told them to go kill all the people. Yes, he did. He did. He told them to annihilate those people. Why did he tell them to annihilate those people? The same reason for the flood. These were not good people. So again, we get that whole thing.
The other
and
question that I always had, though, is the first time the land was given to them, they weren't going to have to take it.
yes,
And the first time, had they gone in, would it have been the same? Would they have had to?
You mean before they got an exile to
Yeah,
Egypt?
before they had to wander 40 years.
Oh.
Before the
Yeah.
18 grumbled.
it's
You know,
Yeah,
because
the
I never
plan.
have understood why, yes, the second time,
Yeah.
maybe the whole thing about the people, but it was also, the animals and everything,
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, question I have, if you look at your map again. So and we talked last week about how he could cross right there from Red Sea. He could have gone out of Ramsey, Goshen, gone around.
He could
Okay.
have gone.
Why didn't he go just up through there with the Philistines, so powerful?
I tell you what, hold that question for when you see Moses in heaven.
Why didn't he just go up there?
The other thing is you have a man driving and you know he's not going to
Ask
ask
for
for
directions. No,
If
seriously.
you just asked Miriam, they would have just gone straight across.
Well, did God say go to
I think that's a perfect time to end. And we actually covered that. I wanted to go more in detail about those things, but that's all right. So next time, it's one chapter, thank the Lord. But next time, you got to think about, we're going through the battles. Because now we're going through the conquering of the land. And here's the thing. They don't conquer all the land. They don't follow God's instructions. Again. All right. That's it. Thank you. And we're leaving the tables up, right?
Yes.
Y'all leave, I think we can leave them all, and maybe take one. Is that all? We need about 4 for tomorrow, don't we? That's all we need.
So we'd only take one
Yeah.
down. And we can move that one back there where it goes.
No. This Bible is translated from the Peshitta text, which is one of the oldest
Christina, what you
documents back in time. It was in Aramaic, which is the language.
They use that a lot.
Did you look in the front?
Yeah.
I have no idea. No idea.
And let's.
Oh, I'm sure it did.
That's